Adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 111. Gadrabha-Pañha. You think of yourself a swan. This question as to the ass will also be set out at length in the Dubbaca-Jātaka. This is the end of the question as to the ass. Source. Adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 112. Amarādevī-Pañha. Cakes and porridge. This question too will be found in the same Jataka. This is the end of the question of Queen Amara. Source. Adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 113. Sigāla-Jātaka. The drunken jackal. This story was told by the master while at the bamboo grove, about Devadatta. The brethren had assembled in the Hall of Truth and were telling how Devadatta had gone to Gayasisa with 500 followers, whom he was leading into error by teaching that the truth was manifest in him and not in the ascetic Gautam, and how by his lies he was breaking up the brotherhood, and how he kept 2 fast days a week. And as they sat there talking of the wickedness of Devadatta, the master entered and was told the subject of their conversation. Brethren, said he, Devadatta was as great a liar in past times as he is now. So saying, he told this story of the past. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the bodhisattva was born a tree fairy in a cemetery grove. In those days a festival was proclaimed in Benares, and the people resolved to sacrifice to the ogres. So they spread fish and meat about courtyards, and streets, and other places, and set out great pots of strong drink. At midnight a jackal came into the town by the sewer, and fed himself on the meat and liquor. Crawling into some bushes, he was fast asleep when morning dawned. Waking up and seeing it was broad daylight, he knew that he could not make his way back at that hour with safety. So he lay down quietly near the roadside where he could not be seen, till at last he saw a solitary brahmin on his way to rinse his mouth in the tank. Then the jackal thought to himself, Brahmins are a greedy lot. I must so play on his greediness as to get him to carry me out of the city in his waistcloth under his outer robe. So, with a human voice, he cried, Brahmin. Who calls me? Said the Brahmin, turning round. I, Brahmin. What for? I have 200 gold pieces, Brahmin. And if you will hide me in your waistcloth under your outer robe and so get me out of the city without my being seen, you shall have them all. Closing with the offer, the greedy Brahmin hid the jackal and carried the beast a little way out of the city. What place is this, Brahmin? Said the jackal. Oh, it's such and such a place, said the Brahmin. Go on a bit further, said the jackal, and kept urging the Brahmin on always a little further, till at last the cremation park was reached. Put me down here, said the jackal. And the Brahmin did so. Spread your robe out on the ground, Brahmin. And the greedy Brahmin did so. And now dig up this tree by the roots, said he, and while the Brahmin was at work he walked onto the robe, and dunged and excreted on it in 5 places, the 4 corners and the middle. This done, he made off into the wood. On this the bodhisattva, standing in the fork of the tree, uttered this stanza. The drunken jackal, Brahmin, cheats your trust. You will not find here 100 cowry-shells, far less your quest, 200 coins of gold. And when he had repeated these verses, the bodhisattva said to the Brahmin, Go now and wash your robe and bathe, and go about your business. So saying, he vanished from sight, and the Brahmin did as he was asked, and departed very mortified at having been so tricked. His lesson ended, the master identified the birth by saying, Devadatta was the jackal of those days, and I the tree fairy. Source. Adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 114. Mitacinti-Jātaka. They too in fish's net. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana monastery, about 2 aged elders. After a rainy season spent in a forest in the country, they resolved to seek out the master, and got together provisions for their journey. But they kept putting off their departure day by day, till a month flew by. Then they provided a fresh supply of provisions, and procrastinated till a second month was gone, and a third. When their lethargy and sluggishness had lost them 3 months, they set out and came to Jetavana monastery. Laying aside their bowls and robes in the common room, they came into the master's presence. The brethren remarked on the length of the time since the two had visited the master, and asked the reason. Then they told their story, and all the brotherhood came to know of the laziness of these idle brethren. Assembling in the hall of truth, the brethren talked together of this thing. And the master entered and was told what they were discussing. Being asked whether they were really so lazy, those brethren admitted their shortcoming. Brethren, said he, in former times, no less than now, they were lazy and unwilling to leave the dwelling. So saying, he told this story of the past. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, there lived in the river of Benares 3 fishes, named over thoughtful, thoughtful, and thoughtless. And they came downstream from the wild country to where men lived. On this thoughtful said to the other 2, "This is a dangerous and perilous neighborhood, where fishermen catch fish with nets, basket traps, and such-like tackle. Let us be off to the wild country again." But so lazy were the other 2 fishes, and so greedy, that they kept putting off their going from day to day, until they had let 3 months slip by. Now fishermen cast their nets into the river. And over thoughtful and thoughtless were swimming on ahead in quest of food, when in their folly they blindly rushed into the net. Thoughtful, who was behind, observed the net, and saw the fate of the other 2. "I must save these lazy fools from death," thought he. So first he dodged round the net, and splashed in the water in front of it like a fish that has broken through and gone upstream. And then doubling back, he splashed about behind it, like a fish that has broken through and gone downstream. Seeing this, the fishermen thought the fish had broken the net and all got away. So they pulled it in by one corner, and the 2 fishes escaped from the net into the open water again. In this way they owed their lives to thoughtful. His story told, the master, as Buddha, recited this stanza. They too in fishers' nets are taken. Them thoughtful saves and frees again. His lesson ended, and the 4 truths explained. At the close of which the aged brethren gained fruition of the first path. The master identified the birth by saying, "These 2 brethren were then over thoughtful and thoughtless, and I thoughtful." Source: adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 115. Anusāsika-Jātaka. The greed-denouncing bird. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana monastery, about a sister who gave a warning to others. For we are told that she came of a good Shravasti city family, but that from the day of her entrance into the order she failed of her duty and was filled with a gluttonous spirit. She used to seek alms in quarters of the city unvisited by other sisters. And elegant food was given her there. Now her gluttony made her afraid that other sisters might go there too and take away from her part of the food. Planning about for a means to stop them from going and to keep everything to herself. She warned the other sisters that it was a dangerous quarter, troubled by a fierce elephant, a fierce horse, and a fierce dog. And she pleaded them not to go there for alms. Accordingly not a single sister gave so much as a look in that direction. Now one day on her way through this district for alms, as she was hurrying into a house there, a fierce ram butted her with such violence as to break her leg. Up ran the people and set her leg and brought her on a stretcher to the convent of the sisterhood. And all the sisters tauntingly said her broken leg came of her going where she had warned them not to go. Not long after the brotherhood came to hear of this. And one day in the Hall of Truth the brethren spoke of how this sister had got her leg broken by a fierce ram in a quarter of the city against which she had warned the other sisters. And they condemned her conduct. Entering the hall at this moment, the master asked, and was told, what they were discussing. As now, brethren, said he, so too in a past time she gave warnings which she did not follow herself. And then as now she came to harm. So saying, he told this story of the past. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the bodhisattva was born a bird, and growing up became king of the birds and came to the Himalayas with thousands of birds in his following. During their stay in that place, a certain fierce bird used to go in quest of food along a highway where she found rice, beans, and other grain dropped by passing wagons. Thinking about how best to keep the others from coming there too, she addressed them as follows. The highway is full of peril. Along it go elephants and horses, wagons drawn by fierce oxen, and such like dangerous things. And as it is impossible to take wing on the instant, don't go there at all. And because of her warning, the other birds dubbed her, Warner. Now one day when she was feeding along the highway she heard the sound of a carriage coming swiftly along the road, and turned her head to look at it. Oh, it's quite a long way off, thought she, and went on as before. Up swift as the wind came the carriage, and before she could rise, the wheel had crushed her and whirled on its way. At the muster, the king noticed her absence and ordered search to be made for her. And at last she was found cut in two on the highway, and the news was brought to the king. Through not following her own caution to the other birds she has been cut in two, said he, and uttered this stanza. The greed denouncing bird, to greed a prey, the chariot wheels leave mangled on the way. His lesson ended, the master identified the birth by saying, the warning sister was the bird, Warner, of those times, and I the king of the birds. Source. Adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 116. Dubbaca-Jātaka. Too much. This story was told by the master while at Jetavana monastery, about an unruly brother whose own story will be given in the 9th book in the Gidja-Jataka. The master rebuked him in these words. As now, so in former days were you unruly, brother, disregarding the advices of the wise and good. For which reason, by a javelin you did die. So saying, he told this story of the past. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the bodhisattva was born into an acrobat's family. When he grew up, he was a very wise and clever fellow. From another acrobat he learned the javelin dance, and with his master used to travel about exhibiting his skill. Now this master of his knew the 4 javelin dance but not the 5. But one day when performing in a certain village, he, being in liquor, had 5 javelins set up in a row and gave out that he would dance through the lot. Said the bodhisattva, you can't manage all 5 javelins, master. Have one taken away. If you try the 5, you will be run through by the 5th and die. Then you don't know what I can do when I try, said the drunken fellow. And paying no attention to the bodhisattva's words, he danced through 4 of the javelins only to impale himself on the 5th like the basia flower on its stalk. And there he lay groaning. Said the bodhisattva, this calamity comes of your disregarding the advices of the wise and good. And he uttered this stanza. Too much, though painful against my will, you tried. Clearing the 4, upon the 5th you died. So saying, he lifted his master from off the javelin point and duly performed the last offices to his body. His story done, the master identified the birth by saying, this unruly brother was the master of those days, and I the pupil.